All right, let's get cooking. Welcome to the latest edition of Chin Check Sports Radio. I'm your host, JD. I want to thank you all for taking the time out to join us. And as always, we welcome any suggestions, feedback, comments, and criticisms, which improves the quality of our program, which ultimately improves your listening experience. Before we get started, I want to send all of you thank you for your tremendous support. People are slowly but surely finding out about who we are and what we do. They enjoy and respect the passion with which we speak. But as we always say, we do this because we love it. And all we are doing is we are sharing our passions with you all as we continue to build our listening army to take over the world. We are coming right back at you. I know it's been a while. We want to continue on with our Chin Check Sports Radio top 10 boxing upsets of all time based on the fights that we grew up watching. And now we are coming down to number 2. We are definitely coming down the home stretch here. And as you see on your screen, from February 11th, 1990, Iron Mike Tyson defending the heavyweight championship of the world against James Buster Douglas. Now, we racked our brains to how we were going to put together this program. Because if you go back 2 years ago, we did another program on Tyson and Douglas, because February of 2020 was the 30th anniversary of that fight. So we did Tyson Douglas 30 years later, the defeat of Godzilla. And that was paying homage to the type of star that Mike Tyson was, a giant of a star, and paying homage to the famous mythical beast out of Japan, Godzilla, that became famous here in America. So Tyson being seen as Godzilla, this heavy underdog, was supposed to just blow away this competition, and he ended up losing. So now we had to figure how are we going to present this program to you all, and we definitely were not going to re-upload the program, because that's not what we do at Chin Check Radio. We have original content. And so now we're going to figure out how we're going to discuss this program. So instead of going through the round by round like you heard us going through in the other fights that we've done, we're going to talk about the causes and what led up to this and some of the aftermath of really what happened with this monumental upset. And you're probably going to ask yourself, well, why is this number 2 if everything that we saw and heard, this is supposed to be the biggest upset of all time? We'll get to that later on. So Mike Tyson, our quick tail of the tape here, was 37-0, 33 KOs, standing 5 feet 11 inches in height, and I don't even think that's a reach, weighing 220.5 pounds, was the WBA, the WBC, the IBF, and the ring/the lineal heavyweight champion of the world. And by lineal, lineage, line, man who beat the man, who beat the man. So Mike Tyson was the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world, against one James Buster Douglas, who stood 6 feet 4 inches, weighing 231.5 pounds, standing 6 feet 4. Now, some notable fights from the career of Buster Douglas going into this fight was November 9th, 1984, a majority decision in 10 rounds over Randall Tex Cobb. Now, if the name Randall Cobb sounds familiar to you all, for older fight fans, he was a boxer who fought in the 1980s, who once challenged Larry Holmes for the heavyweight championship of the world. He holds victories over Ernie Shavers, as well as the late Leon Spinks, which is the father of Corey Spinks and the brother of one Michael Spinks. So Randall Cobb was a heavyweight contender of the 1980s. Modern fans, well, a little slightly older fans, might know him as a small actor in some rather famous movies. I would say most notably, go back and watch the movie Ace Ventura: Pet Detective. There was a scene at the beginning of the movie where Ace, you see with opening credits, and Ace is kicking his package around and is clearly damaging the package, and this big, gruff, scary-looking white guy, he answers the door, and the guy goes, "What is this?" And he goes, "It's broken." And Ace Ventura character says, "Yes, it probably is, but just sign here and you'll be reimbursed." And this gruff white guy takes the package and he throws it away, and he tells the dog, to get away from the door. He realized that he had been had by Ace Ventura, who smuggled the dog out of the apartment, and he ended up bashing Ace Ventura's car with with the baseball bat because that was supposed to be the woman's ex-husband. Of course, Ace Ventura, being a pet detective, came and he retrieved the dog. So that is Randall Tex Cobb at the very beginning of Ace Ventura, Pet Detective. May of 1985, a majority decision loss to one Jesse Ferguson, who by 8 years later challenged the then undisputed heavyweight champion of the world, Eddie Bowe, for a title shot and ended up losing. January of 1986, a unanimous decision victory in 10 rounds over one Greg Page. That's part of the reason why Mike Tyson could be a reason with Tyson's lack of focus about losing the Douglas fight, but we'll get to that in a second. May of 1987, lost his first chance at a championship against one Tony TNT Tucker in a fight that James Buster Douglas was actually winning. He had his moments, but lost by TKO in the 10th round for the IBF Heavyweight Championship that eventually Mike Tyson won that title. So you really take a look at it. I mean, of course, again, it's been replayed that Mike Tyson was going to just roll over Buster Douglas. Again, we have discussed before that it was really a tune-up fight to really get something going against Evander Holyfield, at the time the former undisputed cruiserweight champion of the world, who was hoping to move up and land a big payday against one Mike Tyson, and we discussed that in fight number 5. So how did we get to this point? Mike Tyson, at the top of the world, decides to shed members of his team due to his his marriage to one Robin Givens and her mother, as well as promoter Don King, who were able to, and I'm going to use this word, to pull Mike Tyson away from the people who handled Tyson before, namely manager Bill Cayton, where after the death of one Custy Amato, after the death of one Jimmy Jacobs, the people who brought in Mike, fostered Mike, coddled Mike, developed him to the heavyweight championship of the world, especially leading him and managing him through all the boxing politics. He was left with longtime manager Bill Cayton. Of course, there was a rift, especially in terms of contracts. Don King playing the black card to kind of put that pro-black, to kind of get away from the white promoters, which even led to a departure with longtime trainer one Kevin Rooney, where if you look at the people who really trained Mike Tyson and really refined his boxing skills, was that lineage of one Custy Amato, maybe a Teddy Atlas, who left the house due to a split with Mike Tyson, and then Kevin Rooney. So Kevin Rooney was that real connection to the original teachings of one Custy Amato. So now with all these people out, all these people gone, Mike Tyson having a series of yes men around him. Yes, he still fought even after firing these people, and he had some wins against one Carl the Truth Williams. I mean, of course, we really don't think of Carl the Truth Williams as really anything spectacular. So them firing one Kevin Rooney, one Bill Clayton, was after the Michael Spinks fight, June of 1988. When he KO'd Spinks in the first round, Spinks was the light heavyweight champion of the world who moved up to defeat Larry Holmes to become the lineal heavyweight champion of the world. So even though Mike Tyson had all the titles, but Spinks was seen as the lineal champion of the world because he beat the man Spinks, who was still the man. He beat the man Holmes, who was seen as a man. So February of 1989, a TK on the 5th round against one Frank Bruno in a tougher fight than expected, because Bruno had Mike rocked on the ropes a little bit, but eventually Frank Bruno, billion-dollar physique, really not much else. I know he's not in the greatest of health right now, but we're talking from that time frame, and a TKO victory against Carl the Truth Williams. So with Tyson's corner being gone, Tyson having a bunch of yes men, Tyson now holding versions of the heavyweight championship of the world since the age of 20 in 1986, now at the age of 24 years old. Folks, think to yourself, when you were 24 years old, you didn't think about getting old, you didn't think about tomorrow, you thought about today, you thought about excesses, you thought about women, your mojo was working. I ain't gonna say it was at its peak, but it was sure close to its peak. So what are you thinking about? And I think people tend to forget that with Iron Mike. You're a 24-year-old young man. You have money at your disposal. He was a big star in the 1980s. Had the famous video game of Mike Tyson's Punch-Out. So Mike Tyson was a big star. 24 years old. You have women around you. He was in a very abusive relationship, or as they say, abusive relationship with one Robin Givens, who really didn't love Mike, who played Mike like a fiddle, as the older folks will tell you. So going into this fight, was Mike really prepared? And clearly, from a mental standpoint, the answer would be no. He just divorced Robin Givens. You're laying up with everything and anybody. You're just running through women. Singer Bobby Brown put in his autobiography that he met Mike Tyson in Tokyo, and they partied the night before the fight. He didn't want to go to sleep. Mike figured, I'm going to beat this guy, Buster Douglas, so easily, and that he's an amateur. So, of course, Mike was partying and doing Lord knows what, especially in Japan, where it's known as definitely a party town. Of course, Mike Tyson being the star that he was, I can only imagine what he was getting himself into. Of course, everybody from Jim Lampley to Larry Merchant, the HBO broadcast team of the time, they thought it was going to be an easy fight. Go back and listen to Buster Douglas's his ring walk and the commentary by one Larry Merchant. So this is really all about, as people will tell the story, all about Mike being unprepared and not taking a man seriously. As the old saying goes, when you don't take your opponent seriously, he becomes a serious opponent. So Mike Tyson chasing a ghost of Robin Givens, not focused, being around a bunch of yes men who's not going to push him, who's not really going to refine his skills, and is only really relying on his knockout power and not being the technically sound fighter that was raised and honed by Custy Amato, and that was honed by one Kevin Rooney. So Mike became a headhunter. Wasn't that, didn't use a lot of defense. He pretty much relied on his chin and his punching power. And of course, having yes men in the corner who are not really going to push you, having guys like Aaron Snowell and Jay Bright in the corner, a serious letdown from being under the tutelage of one Kevin Rooney. Now we talked about Greg Page and why his name always tends to come up. There's a famous video in Sparring for the Buster Douglas fight in which Greg Page knocked Mike Tyson down in sparring. Now again, this is sparring. Things happen. For those of us who box, of course, sparring is a way to get yourself better. If you guys do grappling or any type of MMA or rolling on the ground, they call it rolling. So with grappling is rolling, with boxing is sparring. It's just refining your skills, kind of getting you in shape, kind of get your timing, getting used to being hit, getting used to training with a specific target. So sparring is definitely a must for any top professional fighter, and you never ever want to look bad in sparring. And I'm sure everybody has their off days, but if you're Iron Mike Tyson, you're supposed to be the baddest man on the planet. You're supposed to be Kid Dynamite. You're supposed to be Iron Mike, and you're getting knocked down by C-level competition in sparring, wearing headgear. Not a good deal. So clearly, of course, but nobody's thinking that Buster Douglas will crack the code, but it's those little signs that were there, and of course, and this is only retrospect and hindsight 2020, how those things would figure prominently in the fall of Mike Tyson on the particular night. As for James Buster Douglas, again, seen as kind of an underachiever, again, lost his one title shot against Tony TNT for the IBF championship, and Tony TNT will lose in his very next fight against one Mike Tyson. So again, Tyson beats Tucker by unanimous decision. Tucker knocks out Douglas, so it was only, again, it only reaffirmed the belief that Buster Douglas was a lamb being let out to slaughter. But a sad thing happened that ended up being an unintended consequence. The death of Lula Pearl Douglas, his mother, less than a month before the fight, gave Buster Douglas more added incentive to train, really kept his focus, really wanted to do it for his mom. Of course, Buster Douglas' dad was a fighter himself, it was his dream for his son to be a professional fighter. So the death of his mom, a month before going into the fight against one Mike Tyson, that really woke up something in Buster Douglas to train harder, to really focus himself, to not really be afraid of the aura of one Mike Tyson, because Mike Tyson did have an aura when he stepped into the ring. Probably the two most famous fights before then was a Michael Spinks fight. When you go back and watch that, you could tell Spinks was nervous before he even walked into the ring. You can tell that Frank Bruno was scared because he gave the sign across 1,000 times in his corner. So there was always that mystique in the aura of one Mike Tyson, and why not? This is a guy who came out black trunks, black shoes, no socks, sometimes shirtless, or at most wearing a towel. So definitely Mike didn't have that look of other fighters who had some type of boxing robe and they wore it into the ring. Mike had the scowl, Mike had the look. So it always was that intimidation factor of Mike Tyson going to the ring. Well, that night, folks, Buster Douglas wasn't afraid. Looked right back at Mike Tyson. And I'm going to say this, and we did this on the previous broadcast where we discussed the 30th anniversary. But Buster Douglas cracked open a can of whip ass on our Mike that night. Yes, folks, we said it, and we are big Tyson fans too. But Buster Douglas cracked open a serious can of whoop ass on Mike Tyson. Jabbing, right hand, picking the shots, snapping Mike's head back. And we talked about the trainers in the corner, the ineptitude of the trainers, not having an end swell, which is a small metal compress that is usually kept in ice to help reduce swelling. As Mike was getting his ass kicked and his eye started to swell, there was no end swell, there was no ice pack, which only shows Mike's overconfidence, and I'm sure the corner's overconfidence that Mike was gonna roll through this guy. We don't even bring the required equipment to work a corner. So now at this point, the corner is just a disarray. They're using cold water inside of a latex glove to help reduce the swelling. I know if you go back and watch that show, Legendary Fights, from HBO, the trainer even stated when we was always told just put something cold on the swelling. I'm sure water wasn't thought of or talked about. I'm sure some type of ice or some type of end swell will be there to reduce the swelling. They didn't have that, so at this point the corner is a complete mess. And now you have a weary Mike Tyson, a battered Mike Tyson, who now the seeds that were planted, not training properly, partying all night long, not having Cameron in his corner, having a bunch of yes men, getting knocked down in sparring by Greg Page. Now it's bearing fruit in this fight that culminated in a beautiful, when I tell you a beautiful combination where Buster Douglas snaps Mike's head back with an uppercut and follows him up with about a 3-4 punch combination that Mike Tyson ate all of it. And you see the last punch in slow motion before Mike hit the canvas. You see the sweat just jump off of Mike's curl. The famous shot of Mike groping for his mouthpiece. As Mike Tyson explained, the reason why I was reaching for my mouthpiece was because I knew that if I didn't have the mouthpiece in my mouth, they wouldn't let me continue. That could be Mike's explanation, and he can really believe that. And I'm not doubting that was Mike's thought process, but there's no way that referee was gonna let Mike continue like the man was out on his feet. And I remember years ago, having an argument, a discussion/argument with somebody at the gym, and I said, well, I feel the referee stopped the fight too soon, and he could let Mike continue. Despite it being Mike Tyson, a referee's job is to care for the safety of the fighter. If that referee was going to let Mike Tyson continue, Buster Douglas was going to kill Mike in the middle of that ring. So I just left it at that. Now, there was always, the bit of controversy is that when Mike Tyson scored a knockdown in the 8th round against Buster Douglas. Now, even the knockdown, when you look at it, was Buster Douglas admiring his work. Mike still had the punching power, drops Buster Douglas. Now, unlike other knockdowns, when you see other knockdowns from Mike Tyson, when you see the fighter's leg kicking and the fighter staggering all across the ring, or the famous punch with Trevor Burbeck when the man kept getting up and was knocked down by one punch, you clearly saw Buster Douglas clearly had his faculties about him. He was still in his right frame of mind. And as you see Mike come from the neutral corner, the referee had to break his count, and you see the referee kind of look behind, and that momentarily broke the count. So at the time, Don King and his camp protested the result, saying that Douglas had been given a long count by the referee. You watch that fight, I think the referee, it was not a long count. Like, the referee did everything that he was supposed to do, but that was something that Don King, especially in Tokyo, not in the United States, was acting with tremendous bravado, trying to get the fight overturned. He didn't want even Douglas even recognized as a champion. Specifically, him being in bed with the WBC and Jose Suleiman, who initially did not want to recognize Douglas as champion, which is absurd. IBF actually did, but of course, with the public outcry and the boxing commission, I think that Don King just kind of threw in the towel, and now Buster Douglas was recognized as the champion of the world. And guess what? For Buster Douglas's sake, he was a heavyweight champion of the world. He beat the man fair and square, and I think one of the most emotional, I would say, interviews ever is in the fight. Well, is in the ring after the fight, where even Larry Merchant couldn't even comprehend, and he couldn't bring himself to even ask, like, how was Buster Douglas able to do this huge accomplishment? And all Buster Douglas could say was, it was for my mother. It was for my mother, and God bless her heart. And you see Buster break down and cry in the middle of the ring. And I always said that was one of the most magical moments, you know, for a post-fight interview, really, in any kind of professional sport. Just seeing a man's raw emotions as he just completed one of the biggest upsets in sports history ever. And the first words out of his mouth was for his mother. So clearly the death of his mother clearly motivated Buster Douglas to really do the best he can. It shook that fear of one Mike Tyson. I guess when your mama died, you have no fear of really any man, and you push yourself to be the best that you can be. The purses for that fight was Buster Douglas earned $1.3 million, while Mike got $6 million. So clearly, which makes sense, Mike was a bigger star at that time, and I'm sure if you adjust for inflation, how much $6 million was in 1990 versus now, you kind of do your own math. So now the question was, well, what happens next? There was talk of a rematch, but they could never get the rematch going because all rematch plans fell through. So Buster Douglas ended up fighting Evander Holyfield. We all know the history there. Evander Holyfield knocks out Buster Douglas in the third round. A grossly overweight and out of shape Buster Douglas falls in the third round to one Evander Holyfield, and we discussed this in the Tyson-Holyfield fight. So now Holyfield becomes champion of the world. At this point, Douglas just falls off. Mike Tyson fights a couple more times, is sentenced to prison, and now the rest is history. So when you're asking yourself, well, Chin Check Radio, there's been documentaries of this fight, 42-1 from ESPN, 30 for 30. It's been on HBO Legendary Fight Series. You've spoken about it before. Why is this number 2? Because the caveat is based on the fights that we grew up watching. Now, as we stated on the previous broadcast, we were relatively young where we understood boxing. We go back to the Spinks fight when uncles and dad's friends would come over, and this uncle would come over and they'll talk about the fight, and you hear people around the time growing up in Newark, New Jersey, especially Mike fought in Atlantic City a lot. So Mike was a huge fan favorite, especially in New Jersey. So when you hear the grown folks talking about Mike Tyson fighting Michael Spinks, okay, Mike Tyson is something. Our first understanding that something big has happened when Mike Tyson lost against Buster Douglas. But it really didn't affect us because, again, we were young and we didn't understand really the magnitude of it. We knew that it was something big that happened, and as we got older and as we really started to really get into watching Mike Tyson, it's like, okay, that really was a huge upset. But at that time, how it affected us, yes, it was huge. I think maybe a year or two later, as we really started to appreciate it, and I think people just chalked it up to a bad night, because with Tyson, it was always this, well, what if he was in prime shape? He probably wouldn't have lost to Douglas. But of course, as we got older, we always say that, well, that's Mike's fault for not training properly, because again, when you don't take the opponent seriously, he becomes a serious opponent. So knowing that fight growing up, we watched it, we knew it was something big, because again, uncles and fathers and everybody was talking about it. It was big, but did it really affect us? But it was always around. I remember a part of the old World Wrestling Federation where Mike Tyson was supposed to be on a Saturday night's main event card, and I remember he was pulled and Buster Douglas was on that card. So we knew, that something was big. And as we got older, it was a huge upset. We watched that fight a bunch of times ourselves. We've seen every documentary about it, watched every documentary, spoke to people who understood, because we actually watched this fight and we like, man, Mike Tyson doesn't look good. Like, he's losing. Then of course the old folks say, well, Mike has a punching power. Eventually he'll knock this guy out, despite him having a bad night. But that's why it's number 2, because again, it really didn't affect us as young, or the effect of some of these other fights had. But it's still one of the biggest upsets, not only in heavyweight boxing history, but in boxing history and sports history. So any list that I was around alive to see, it has to be up there, but it's not the number 1 fight for the aforementioned reasons. So we'll be back. Stand by for the number 1 fight, but please let us know your thoughts and comments on this particular fight. And it's Chin Check Radio signing out.